I'm back reading. We have Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving, Pete Walker, and this is a book that I've been basically reading over the last year and a half, and it's helped me resolve a lot of my own complex PTSD issues. So getting this work out there is really important for people that have been through abuse and in childhood, because it gives the information that takes us to another level and gets us to be comfortable with ourselves and to learn to operate in the world in a healthy way. And also the other book is The Tao of Fully Feeling by Pete Walker. And this book was before the Complex PTSD book. So what I'm going to do is read about recovery and self-pity and what that means for people that have been through trauma. And I'm just going to read away, and if anybody comes on and asks any questions, then I will talk or answer questions as I go. So Pete Walker says, I am often saddened when I hear adult children parrot the conventional wisdom that it is bad to feel sorry for yourself. This so-called wisdom shames people out of normal, healthy self-pity. Everyone needs to occasionally feel sorry for themselves. Tears for the self are some of the most potently healing experiences of recovery. Self-pity in balance and moderation is extremely healing. Recovery, in fact, is often very limited until there are profound experiences of feeling sorry for oneself. Self-pity in balanced moderation is miraculously releasing gift of self-sorrowing. Self-sorrowing is one of the most beautiful and restorative of our emotional experiences. So a lot of people that have been through abuse will be told not to go on about it, to let it go and just get over it. And a lot, when we miss out on the grieving process, we don't heal. So it's really important that if we have complex PTSD or we've been through trauma, that we get a chance to really come out of the denial to begin to heal the depth of the wound. Reading on, he says that self-sorrowing is one of the most beautiful and restorative of emotional experiences. There is nothing in the world more centering than a good, unabashed cry about one's troubles. Nothing dissolves the awful abandonment pain of the inner child like a good cry for the self. This is especially true when the adult child imagines himself back in the past, tenderly comforting his crying inner child. Self-pity is only dysfunctional when it is excessive. So he's explaining here that a lot of children who've been, as adults who've had childhoods that were abusive, we were not allowed to feel sorry for ourselves. We were given marching orders and maybe quite excessively treated badly. So we've really got to get to a healing place. We're going to have to go for the psychoeducation in conjunction with therapy and other modalities. But without the psychoeducation, it's a really slow process. So I'm going to continue reading. He said, this is sometimes seen in people who spend extreme amounts of time feeling sorry for themselves. Although long periods of self-pity can be healthy in some phases of recovery, it is possible to get stuck in and addicted to self-pity. And this is sometimes the case with a long-term recovery who does nothing effective to recover the losses of her childhood. She may become so disempoweringly lost in self-pity that she never acts to change abusive or neglectful situations. This kind of excessive self-pity usually looks so dysfunctional that it may alienate others from healthy and moderate self-pity in an all or none kind of way. Self-pity, however, is not a black and white issue. We do not need to throw out the baby of self-compassion with the bathwater of excessive self-pity. Crying for the self is especially therapeutic when old pain resurfaces from unresolved childhood traumas. So when we, like today, I got a bit triggered about something. It's important that we've got people there that understand us, and that when we hit grief, that for some people have not done any grieving over the loss, abandonment and betrayal in childhood. And that keeps us stuck in disassociation and in denial, which means that we don't heal the original issue. And sometimes it happens that later in life, we'll have a breakdown of some sort, and all of that past will then rear its head and come to the surface. So the sooner we get on to understanding books that, the books that I've been reading, which are The Tao of Fully Feeling, which is here, Pete Walker, and The Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving, which is here, the more we get the knowledge that we need, along with therapy and psychoeducation, we're going to come out of the childhood trauma that we suffered bit by bit. It's not all or nothing. It's an ongoing process, because flashbacks, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response can debilitate us. So, again, what you'll find below this video, you'll find 13 steps for managing your flashbacks and 14 steps for managing your inner critic. There are certain ways that we can work through this, but clearly, this is what I'm doing. I'm just reading and putting this stuff out there. I'm going to continue reading. He says, this kind of excessive self-pity usually looks so dysfunctional that it may alienate others from healthy and moderate self-pity in an all or none kind of way. Self-pity, however, is not a black and white issue. We do not need to throw out the baby of self-compassion with the bathwater of excessive self-pity. Crying for the self is especially therapeutic when old pain resurfaces from unresolved childhood traumas. The average dysfunctional family leaves it to survivors with lifelong tendencies to flashback on some occasions into shame, fear, and emptiness. Unashamed crying can often resolve and work through the pain of such experiences. It is a sad statement that our culture that we have no positive term for the healthy side of self-pity. We are praised as compassionate when we feel sorry for others, but there is no corresponding term for feeling sorry for ourselves. Little wonder we are so codependent. So he explains here that what happens is that if we don't acknowledge our own needs and we deny what we've experienced, then we cling on to others, expecting other people to be our savior. We can do it in relationships and become codependent, or we can do it in friendships, and it can create all sorts of problems. So the more that we learn to manage ourselves and step into our own, restart our own self-esteem and begin to love ourselves and get rid of our inner critic, we're going to have a better and healthier life. And there are many people out there who've had sexual abuse and trauma and violence and verbal abuse as children. And the more people that get to speak about it and do so without the toxic shaming that goes on and the belief that we've just got to forgive people, we're going to, heal what needs to be healed in us. And a lot of sicknesses, like, when we get really stressed out, the body, the immune system takes a hit. And when we go into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, the four F's, Pete Walker calls it, they're flashbacks, we're compromising our immune system. And that's something that, I can attest to, that I was so stressed out and so in panic attacks and anxiety that I'd have lots of autoimmune issues. And the more that I began to heal and look at what was going on through psychoeducation, reading books, and losing the toxic shame and the guilt that I felt for not being able to forgive what was heinous for me as a child, the more that I got healthier, healthy anger, healthy blame. And all of these things are frowned upon in society. And particularly when it's parental abuse, we're almost told that we've just got to accept it and it was normal and we didn't have it as bad as other people. And this needs to stop in society, because I think that it's extremely unfair that children generally, little people, 2, 3, 4 years old and any age, that they're suffering abuse from adults and they've got no way of walking away from that situation. It's chronic. And Pete Walker says that 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys have trauma through childhood. Huge amount of people. There's 7.5 billion of us. So we're talking about probably half the population suffers abuse, and heavy-handed abuse as well. We've got here, he says, we are praised as compassionate when we feel sorry for others, but there is no corresponding term for feeling sorry for ourselves. Little wonder that we are so codependent. Society's taboos against self-pity offers us no choice but to limit our compassion to caring only about the pain of others. We need to resist those who toxically shame us for being on the self-pity pot. Whenever we experience normal sadness about our painful life experiences, this is true wherever whether they are past or present. Our recovery can only be aided by the rejection of this pervasive social indoctrination against self-pity. We must refuse to accept the nonsense that it is good to feel sorry for others, but not for ourselves. We must strive to reclaim ourselves and the potent healing tool of sometimes feeling sorrow for ourselves. Unfortunately, the right and need to feel sorry for ourselves can be very difficult to recover. Most of us have been thoroughly brainwashed against self-compassion by our parents and wider society. Many of us have also had this shaming of self-compassion reinforced by religion that we were raised in. Consequently, many survivors have come to believe that self-pity is in some way an awful sin rather than the precious gift that it is. Some adult children may be helped to reclaim their self-compassion by remembering, and this is, he says here that even Jesus felt sorry for himself. He modeled the positive side of self-pity when he wept in the garden and on the cross. Unless the survivor of the dysfunctional family feels unashamed sorrow for the child that she was, she will never really understand the magnitude of what she had lost. Crying for the inner child and her losses from poor parenting often spontaneously awakens a heartfelt desire to compassionately remother herself or himself. Tears of self-compassion can also motivate our efforts to give our inner children the unconditional love that they so eminently deserve, that was so unfairly withheld from them. Tears for the child can also spontaneously awaken a desire to champion and refather our inner children, to protest unfair treatment and to protect them from abuse. So when we do that, change it, because what happens is that if we've been abused as children, then we get into adult relationships that where there's abuse, that we don't clock it, we just think it's normal. And then we'll choose partners maybe that replicate the same behavior that was dished out by parents or carers, and we won't stand up for ourselves. So it's really important that we reparent ourselves and begin to be our own mother and our own father and know what's good for us. And, a good father would stand up for us and a good mother would nurture us. And if we've not had that, we're going to have to learn to do it for ourselves. And it's a long road, but the book Complex PTSD From Surviving to Thriving, the information in there works. And it's currently free on Amazon USA, it's free on Audible, and it's free on Kindle UK. So you can check that out, and the links are below again. Going on, he says, compassionate crying for the self can also create deep bodily based feelings of peace and relaxation. Balanced self-sorrowing often fosters a miraculous rebirth of the heart from the depth of the obsessing mind. Healthy self-pity increases an individual's experience of being heart-centered. As such, it often nurtures an inner softening that attracts real experiences of human love. So you can imagine a child that's had no human love, like myself, a lot of hardship, and so many out there I know that have had hardship and they just are in denial about it. And as adults then are finding it very difficult to love themselves and have this awful inner critic that annihilates them. Continuing reading, he says, as much as I can welcome myself in my sadness, that much can I thoroughly welcome and receive another. Most of us must fight very hard to recover the right to self-sorrow. The hard-won right will hopefully never be given up or outgrown. We must always have a special place in our hearts for feeling sorry for ourselves. And he says that was published in Recovering the Adventure of Life Beyond Addiction, and that's by Pete Walker on Complex PTSD. So now what I'm going to read is another article. It's a couple of pages long. And if anybody's got any questions out there, you can, it's a bit difficult for people to want to comment on YouTube Live. So you can go over to my Facebook page, or you can email me. And the other thing is as well, is that I've got a group for ladies, which is anxiety and PTSD free. And it's specifically for ladies to give that, the freedom to be able to speak about female issues over there. And that I created that a year or so ago. But continuing reading this now, he explains it's an article on forgiveness begins with the self. So I'm going to read it because I think it's really important for people to hear this out there, to understand what forgiveness is in a slightly different way to that which society throws on us. Your friends might say, if you've been through abuse, and particularly myself, I'm going through sexual abuse, I was told many times by people, oh, you've got to forgive people because they're your parents. And when you're in flashbacks, having nightmares and having panic attacks and anxiety, it's extremely difficult to be in a good place to even consider such things. So here goes. And you need people out there who understand you. There are plenty of groups on Facebook that I know of as well. So if you don't know any groups on Facebook, you can ask me that too. And I can guide you to which ones I know or that I'm a member of. So Pete Walker says, there has been a lot of shaming and dangerous and inaccurate guidance put out about forgiveness in the last few years, in both the recovery community and in transpersonal and spiritual circles. And I'll add it to religious circles as well, I would add there. He says, many survivors of dysfunctional families have been injured by the simplistic black and white advice that decrees that they must embrace a position of being totally and permanently forgiving in order to recover. Unfortunately, those who have taken the advice to forgive abusers that they have not fully grieved abuses where they have not fully grieved abuses that are still occurring, and or abuses so heinous that they should and could never be forgiven, often find themselves getting nowhere in their recovery process. So we have to realize in society, whatever the world says, in my opinion, there are some evil acts out there, and some things are unforgivable. And we really have to think about that, because a lot of our parroting that we do, it's brainwashed stuff. We're not really looking, we're just repeating what other people have told us because we've heard it so many times. So clearly we know what evil is, and we know what unkindness is, and we know what heinous acts are. And we really need to look at the bigger picture. And it's not about going around, blaming people, but it's seeing things for what they are. He goes on to say, in fact, the possibility of attaining real feelings of forgiveness is usually lost when there is a premature cognitive decision to forgive. So let's say one decides that they're still grieving and they're in deep pain and having nightmares, having anxiety and flashbacks, and they believe that they've got to forgive the people that abuse them maybe for 5, 10, 15 years, whatever it may be. And we can't force forgiveness. And the interesting thing is, which I have found myself to be true, that when something has been fully processed, there is nothing to forgive. So you might like to look at any situation in your life where you've believed that you've had to forgive somebody, maybe a friend or a boyfriend or girlfriend or a partner, for something that they did, and you were unable to, but you truly wanted to. But if you look back, you might see that at some point it just didn't matter anymore. And what would have happened, the reason it didn't matter anymore, is because you had fully processed it, which meant at that point there was nothing to forgive. And that is my view on forgiveness. It cannot be forced on any level. Continuing reading. He says, this is because premature forgiving intentions mimic the defenses of denial and repression. They keep unprocessed feelings of anger and hurt about childhood, unfairness out of our awareness. Real forgiveness is quite distinct from premature forgiveness. It is almost always a byproduct of effective grieving, and no amount of thought intention or belief can bring it into being without a dissension into the feeling realms. Conversely, cognitive and philosophical structures unreceptive to the possibility of forgiveness sometimes block the access to forging feelings, even when such feelings are present. It might be that the most healthy cognitive position concerning forgiveness is an attitude that allows the possibility of its occurrence on the other side of extensive grieving. So without having grieved something fully, expecting ourselves to forgive anything is really just not going to work, because where there is pain, it needs to be worked through. So, when we're in pain, and we can't pretend we're not. He says here, this attitude will work best if it includes the condition that feelings of forgiveness will not be forced or falsely invoked to cover up any unresolved feelings of hurt or anger. In this vein, it is also especially important to note that certain types of abuse are so extreme and damaging to the victim that forgiveness may simply not be an option. And there are examples of this include sociopathy, conscious cruelty, and many forms of scapegoating and parental incest. When forgiveness has substance, it is felt palpably in the heart, and it is usually an expansion of the emotion of compassion. Compassion is certainly not always the same thing as forgiveness, but it is usually the experience within which forgiveness is born. Often this happens via an intermediate process where, having grieved our childhood losses substantially, we occasionally find, changing page, hang on a second, it's stuck. Okay. He says, ourselves considering the extenuating circumstances that contributed to our parents raising us in a neglectful or abusive ways. Most commonly, these extenuating circumstances revolve around two issues. First, our parents often parent us in a way that blindly replicated the way that they were parented. And second, they were often supported in their dysfunctional parenting by the social norms and values of their times. When considering this, we may sometimes get that our parents were also quite victimized, and we may consequently find ourselves occasionally feeling sorry or sorrow for them. When and if this experience of feeling sorrow for them becomes profound enough for us to comprehend how similarly awful and unfair their childhoods were, it can sometimes expand into an experience of feeling forgiveness. However, unless this feeling of forgiveness for our parents is grounded in compassion for our own individual selves, one that has been won via effective grieving for our own losses, the above process will be nothing but an empty mental exercise. As real forgiveness is primarily a feeling, one which with right intention can sometimes gestate, it is, like all other feelings, never complete and never permanent. It is governed by the same dynamic law of emoting that shows human feeling experience to be frequently changing. So think about this, that most human being experience, as we go about through a day, if you look back on today, for instance, or even your last few hours, that the experience is unchoosable, our feelings are unchoosable and unpredictable process of the psyche. So we can see that we don't always go around choosing our thoughts. We're moving from one thing to another. We might go out and get some food and we might be triggered by something. We might watch something on the news or a news feed and see something that triggers us. We might speak to a friend who might speak about their abuse that might trigger a memory in us. We really don't know, from one moment to the next what we're going to feel. I don't know what I'm going to feel in 5 minutes' time. Right now I'm focusing on this. After this, I don't know how I will feel. But I do know, that the more I've understood CPTSD, the more I've been able to care for myself and self-nurture and get to self-love bit by bit. And sometimes I'm hard on myself, but it's a lot less than it used to be. He says here, No emotional state can be induced to persist as a permanent experience. So for instance, you might hear people say, oh, I just want to be happy. Happiness is not a permanent experience. Sadness is not a permanent experience. We might be crying 1 minute over early, childhood trauma, and then we might break out into laughter about something. We're human. We've got a myriad of different emotions that, depending on who we're speaking to as well. He goes on to say, as sad as this may be, as much as we might like to deny it, as much of a cause of ongoing life frustration for each of us it is, as much as we were raised and continue to be reinforced for trying to control and pick our emotions. So spirituality does this, it's either let it go and release it all, hand it over to God, or it's like, you chose your abuse. That's another one I've heard. It's your karma. I mean, there's so many things out there that really, we don't know to be reality, and we need to be a lot kinder and have a lot more compassion for each other and stop blurting out one-liners that really do not serve any other purpose other than to either, shut somebody down or shut them up, or, it's this lack of being able to communicate properly is phenomenal. Incredible. So it's good if we can find people out there that we can resonate with, because it's going to be very healing for us. I've got a few friends I can absolutely speak my truth to, and who listen to me. They allow me to go through my flashback. They care about me. I care about them, and we share equally. So, and anybody who's telling you to let go and forgive, heinous childhood abuse and not hearing you out, then they're not good for you. So it's better to find friends who actually do, care about your feelings. You're worth it. In my opinion, we all are. So continuing on, he says, forgiveness then, at best, like love, remains a human feeling experience that can only temporarily be ours. When grieving has been thorough enough to be reintegrated as a normal and easily accessible process of the psyche, love and forgiveness can also become our consciously chosen values. So we can choose love and we can choose those emotions, but we've got to allow ourselves to feel our own emotions first. If we're shutting down our emotions and disassociating, if we're using, alcohol or drugs or too much television or, being on our own too much, if we're disassociating, we need to look at, what we're doing. If we're overeating or undereating, or it's a long journey, but it's a worthwhile journey, the psychoeducation. Then he says that this can happen in the later stages of recovery when we begin to notice and experience that functional processing and grieving of interpersonal hurts can often lead us quite naturally back into loving feelings. Thus, when I am hurt by intimates, I may not be able to immediately invoke loving or forgiving feelings towards them, but I know that with sufficient communications and non-abusive venting, I will be able to return to an appreciative experience of them. So we all know that we get annoyed with a friend that they might have said something, but then we come back to that feeling, loving feelings for them and compassion. And we need to get to that place with ourselves as well. He says, as much as I can forgive myself, that much can I forgive others. What I really forgive in others is an old pain of mine, released from the disgust of self-hate, and loved and welcomed like a bird with a broken wing. Shame and self-hate did not start with me, but with all my heart, I design that they will stop with me. I will do unto myself as I would have others do unto me. So we need to look at the way other people treat us and what people are saying to us. So if you've got people around you that are not supportive, please get to Facebook and or ask me. I know a few good groups that I'm in that I like, and they're anxiety and PTSD groups and stuff like that. So I'm going to be back with some more reading tomorrow. I hope whoever's watching, I will say on these YouTube lives, you can't see who's watching, but you can see how many viewers there are. So I know there's a couple people watching at the moment, and I thank you for sticking with me through the time that I've read this. And I'll be back tomorrow with something else. Tomorrow or the day after, I'll come, read a bit more from Pete Walker's book, Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. And The other thing I'm going to be doing next week, I'm going to be starting, I love astrology. I've studied astrology for a couple of years now. So I'm going to be making some videos on astrology and showing people how they can use that in their healing process as well, understanding the psyche and stuff like that, which is fascinating. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Thank you.